Hey guys, Heather here. Welcome to my humble abode. We are going to make some bread today, and I think a lot of people freak out when they think, oh my gosh, I'm gonna make bread. It's become like the baker's equivalent to climbing Mount Everest. But honestly, bread making is not that hard, and take heart that your ancestors for the thousands of years all made their own bread. They did it because it's really not as complicated as we make it out to be.
Why don't you explain this to me like I'm 5?
So I'm gonna hopefully simplify it for you guys today. I've got some tips that will help you out, and yeah, I think it should be a lot of fun. And at the end, hopefully you'll have 2 delicious hot loaves of bread that you can cut into and devour. Also, this recipe can be found on mynonchemicalromance.com. That is my food blog, and I take a lot of pride into what I do. If you could check me out there too, that would be awesome. And there's also more tips there, things like photos of all of the process that I go through in case you want a quick look at, instead of looking at this whole video again. It's just a little bit easier for you, hopefully, than having to look at this, you know, every single time you make a loaf of bread, which you're welcome to. I mean, I'm glad to have you here. So without further ado, let's get baking.
We're going to be using the hook attachment. Go ahead and put 3 cups of cold water into your mixing bowl. We use cold water to slow down the fermentation process, making a tastier dough. 2 tablespoons of yeast, 1/4 cup of your oil of choice. I have olive oil here. 1/4 cup of molasses or sugar or honey, whichever you prefer. I'm using molasses. And 3 cups of whole wheat flour, 3 cups of white flour. And the only reason I do a 1/2 cup right here is because I forgot to do a whole cup. So I will add in a whole cup at the end. And what we're doing is we're separating the bottom ingredients, mostly the yeast, from the salt that we're going to be putting in. We'll be putting in a tablespoon of salt, and that's because salt slows the process of yeast, and we don't want that to happen. So now we'll mix this, we'll bring it together as much as we possibly can, and then we're going to feel the dough. The thing that we're looking for when we feel for dough is how loose and how dense it is. And we want to find that perfect middle ground. So right here you can see that the dough is extremely loose, super sticky. We need to add more flour. So we're going to add in a 1/2 cup of white flour and 1/2 cup of wheat flour. And we're going to bring this together again until all the flour is incorporated. And once that flour is incorporated, then we'll feel it again. And again, we're looking for that middle ground in between dense and loose. You don't want it to be super dense because you're going to have a brick of a loaf, and you don't want it to be super loose because it's not going to have any structure to it for this particular loaf of bread that we're making. The reason that I do it this way is because no matter where you are, if you're in the mountains or if you're in the ocean, by the ocean, you can always make consistent bread because you know how to bake by feel. So we're going to feel it again. It still is pretty loose. And so we're going to add in another 1/2 cup of white flour and 1/2 cup of wheat flour to keep them even. And again, we're going to mix this together until it is fully incorporated. And don't mind that flour going over the side. And once this is fully incorporated, we're going to feel it again. You can start to see that this is looking a little bit more like what we want it to do. It's starting to pull away from the sides of the bowl, which is always a good sign. My mom used to always tell me that that's when you knew there was enough flour. And I like to go the extra step of feeling the dough as well. So we're going to stop the mixer and fill the dough again. And it feels great. You can see that it's less sticky. It's not too loose. It's not too dense. It's just right. So we're going to knead this in the mixing bowl for 10 minutes. And I'm going to speed that process up for you just so that we can you don't want to be here for 10 minutes watching this kneading. But you can see after just a few minutes, it's already starting to come together. But I want to make sure that you guys know not to add any more flour during the kneading process. And that is because that flour won't have as much time to develop its gluten properties as it will for the rest of the dough. So don't add in any more flour. After that 10 minutes is up, we're going to scrape off the hook. And we're going to cover it and let it sit for about an hour. And you can spray your bowl if you want to, or you can just leave it. I usually just leave it because I'm a little bit lazy when it comes to that, but we'll set our timer for an hour. If you do spray the bowl, then you're going to have to take the dough out, spray the bowl, put the dough back in, and then cover it up so it'll come out easier. In the meantime, time to go get some work done around the house. Okay, 60 minutes is up. We want our dough to be just a little bit bigger. I want it to be twice the size of what it was before we started. So I'm going to set it for about 20 more minutes, come back, and voila, much better. So next we're going to prepare our loaf pans. And I like to use non-stick spray, especially for you beginners out there. If you're worried about your loaves sticking, non-stick spray is a great solution for that. You can also coat it in oil or butter. You're also going to oil your surface, and I do this instead of flour because it's easier to clean up and it doesn't stick like flour does. It's just less stressful. So oil your surface, pour out your dough, and we're gonna shape your loaves. And I'm gonna dump this out successfully. As well as get a spatula to just scrape out the bowl. You can also spray down your bowl before the rise. I never do because this works for me. And then after that, I'm going to get out my bench knife, and you can use a pizza cutter or a knife, and you're just going to cut them into 2 equal parts. And we are going to flatten the dough out, punch out all that air so that when this dough rises, it will rise evenly. You're going to then fold one side 2/3 of the way over, the other side over that, and you're going to roll the dough into itself somewhat tightly, making sure that you do it tight enough to keep it secured, but not too tight that the top rips. And then put the dough in your loaf pan, and if you need to squish it down a little bit so that the sides touch the ends, so the ends of your loaf don't burn. And you're going to shape the other loaf, put them together and cover them with that same cloth and let them rise for about 45 minutes. The second rise is usually a little faster because the water in the bread is coming up to room temperature. Time to get some more work done. Like before, I want the bread to rise almost double in size, and I like to think of it as almost as big as it's going to be when it's finished being a loaf, because it's only going to rise a little bit more in the oven. I'm also going to do a poke test. So if you poke your dough and it springs back just a little bit but not all the way, that means it's perfect. If it doesn't spring back, it means it's gone too far, and if it springs back all the way, it means it needs more time. So now we're going to set the oven for 350 degrees, and once that has reached 350, go ahead and put your loaves in the oven for 35 minutes. And when that 35 minutes is done, the tops should be golden. And that's how I like to gauge if this loaf is done. If the top is golden, I'll pour out the loaf. And if the bottom is golden, then it's ready to go. You can also tap it, and it sounds hollow. If the sides and the bottom are not golden, I'll put it back in the pan and let it bake for another 5 minutes. And then you'll know that the center is all done once those sides look like that coloring that we see. So now it's time to eat. Let's cut into this and have some, shall we?
Cheers. That's it, guys. Hope it went well for you. Feel free to leave a comment. If you have a question, I'd love to answer those for you. So hit subscribe, that would be killer. And if you look in the description below, you'll see the recipe for this as well as the link to my website so that you can see the full recipe there with all the pictures and all that good stuff. Also, there's more recipes there, the whole food recipes from scratch, and a little room for dessert because everybody needs a little dessert in their life, right? But that's also from scratch. So go check that out and happy cooking.